Hi everybody, welcome to the home of Crybaby Performance. Today we're going to talk about valve springs for the Hondas, and it also applies to the Predators. Valve spring pressure is a direct correlation to RPM. The heavier the valve spring, the higher RPM you can get out of the motor. Today we're talking about the valve spring that comes in the Honda 120 and 160. That spring is a 10.8 or 11. But we're not using that spring in the motor. We're going to a 140 valve spring, which comes out of some higher end motor. It does not come in a 120 or 160. Before looking up these springs in the manual, I wrote down a few notes of how many coils and the wire diameter. So now we go to the quarter midget manual, and the numbers are somewhat close. The wire diameter 0.71, 5.3 coils, and so on. So we're nearly close, but not exactly the same. So here's the part number for the Honda valve spring, the 140, that's used in all 120s and 160s. So this is a 16-pound valve spring versus the 11-pound spring, which means you can rev your engine higher with this spring. Your original engine with the Governor only ever ran at 3,500 RPM. That's why it had the smaller, less pressure valve spring, because it would never reach high RPMs. I'm not even sure why they would list the 120 valve spring in the manual. Nobody would ever use this spring. But I have seen it on Red Rookie motors on the exhaust valve, because you want the exhaust to be lazy and the intake to be snappy. So you could put this lightweight spring on the exhaust, but we've never seen any benefit. So now we're looking at the compressed dimension. It's 812 and it's supposed to be 11 pounds, but it comes in around 12 pounds. We now have the valve seal in the picture, which you're not allowed to run, but it is 30 thousandths thick, and they allow you to replace it with a 30 thousandths washer. And when you record the number, it's going to be slightly more than the 12 pounds we were getting earlier. With that valve seal in place, or the washer, you're now getting 15 pounds of pressure at the 812. The more space you can take up and the more you can compress this spring, the higher your valve pressure is going to be. Now that you're done with this dimension, we can go to the installed height measurement, which is shown in the picture. Now with the pointer, you can see the 30 thousandths washer. Now if you can find a thicker cap, the book says up to 100 thousandths, you're going to gain more there. But the oil seal, you cannot run for some reason. But when you start adding up and stacking up all these dimensions, that gives you a stiffer spring rate. So the big question, how often should I change my valve springs? Well, that all depends on what RPM you're running. The higher the RPM you run the motor, the faster you will wear that spring, and it will compress and lose compression over time. The lower the RPM you run the motor, the longer the spring will last. So usually I've seen people change them every other race, or we recommend 5 or 6 races, and always take the intake spring off and put it on the exhaust and put a new one on the intake, so the intake is snappy and the exhaust is lazy. For more information, watch the next video on how thick the valve retainer can be. Thanks for watching from the home of Crybaby Performance, where we try and they cry.